Hi, my name's Stephen Gates. I'm the president of the Port Macquarie Hastings Community Against Ratepayer Exploitation, and today we're going to talk about unsealed roads. Specifically in part one, we're going to talk about the grading program. In full disclosure, I'm also running as mayor for the current council, and any political advertising this has been authorised by Stephen Gates. So when you looked at the podcast on special rate variations, that made you mad. Well, this is going to make you furious. This is a classic example of council's deception, their incompetence, their lack of fairness, objectivity, and simply how rural ratepayers are being exploited and defrauded by council, as well as every other ratepayer. So we're going to talk about unsealed roads. There are about 465 kilometres of unsealed roads. So the first question is, how do roads get on the grading program? Well, from 2012 onwards, Council had to implement the statewide mutual's best practice manual on roads, which is the insurer of council. The first step in that was to have a road register complete and up to date. And that would serve as the foundation for the maintenance of any road, so preventive maintenance or reactive maintenance. Now, council from that developed what's known as a road hierarchy. Now, the road hierarchy lists in descending order every single unsealed road, and council developed this. It never published it. You cannot find it. The only reason I found it was I went to the minutes of the council meeting in 2012, and in an attachment was the road hierarchy. Why they don't publish it goes to the issue of council transparency and accountability. They don't want to be accountable. So if you don't know it, you can't hold them accountable. Unfortunately, it got found out. Now, when we look at that road hierarchy, if it's developed from the roads register, which is a statutory requirement under the Roads Act for a roads authority, i.e. council, must maintain a register of every single road it owns, and it must record the distance. So that's got to be the starting point. But when we look at the road hierarchy for unsealed roads, we find some alarming things. For example, it includes roads on there that have never been gazetted as a road and never owned by council. For example, Fig Tree Valley Way, Plummer Road and Cooks Road in Lorne. It includes Crown roads, which council has stated repeatedly it will not maintain and is not responsible for. Purely and simply, it doesn't own a Crown road. The example is Ludamore Road East. It contains roads not on the roads register. For example, Beauty-Ground Creek Road doesn't appear on the register. Clayworth Road, Boytrang Road, Wood Street Lane. None of these appear on council's statutory roads register. It also includes tracks in reserves or parks. For example, at 77, number 77 of the road hierarchy, it lists four-wheel drive access track. That is not a road. At 25, it has Dunbogan Tip. Now, it may have a dirt road in there. It is not a road. At 39, it lists Shark Beach tracks. At 26, Pilot Beach tracks. These aren't roads whatsoever, and yet they've been included in the grading program and the road hierarchy. What's even more surprising is that the road hierarchy of unsealed road doesn't include every single unsealed road that the council owns. For example, Steinmetz Lane, Bulli Road are not included. And you've got to ask the question, how did this exist? Now, you'd think that with a competent council, if it's got a statutory duty to maintain a road, it'll appear on the grading program. What actually happened was they took a whole lot of roads off in 2015-16. And they came up with two reasons. One was that some roads we're going to call a private road. Now, a private road means that the road is owned by the property, okay, which means it's not on council land. Now, they said that if that road only provides access to one house, then the whole road we're going to call a private road. And in fact, they did. They changed the street sign to private road. Now, that's a complete fabrication. If that landholder wanted to do a pothole repair on the road, it would be breaching the Roads Act. It is an offence on the Roads Act to touch it. The other thing that they took roads off for was that they were never owned by council. So, for example, Plummer Road was never a council-owned road. It was owned by National Parks and Wildlife Service. that was a priority road for grading, and it accounted for 5% of the total budget for unsealed roads. And this is just astounding. But it gets more astounding. So you would think that the distance that council is grading is true and correct. Well, we're going to show you that it's not. So we're talking about that if you're on the grading program, you should stay on it, but they didn't. So for some roads like Thornriver Road, Carinya Road, Haxo-Donald Road were all removed, and they gave the excuse of a private road. Now, they have never been a private road. For example, Thornriver Road has been a gazetted public road owned by council since 1908. We're just going to call it a private road. We're not going to maintain it. So it's a bit farcical of council to do this. And also they had Plummer Road, which was owned by National Parks and Wildlife Service. So much service on the grading program was done on that road, it accounted for 5% of the total works in a particular year. You then think, oh, it couldn't get any worse. But after it took these council roads off, it then brought a whole lot in. So, for example, it brought in tennis clubs, car parks, boat ramps, Charlie Watt Reserve. These are not roads. And in fact, under the insurer's requirements, shouldn't appear on the road hierarchy or the maintenance program, but it did. So one of the important things as to why they came off the grading program was council came up with a concept in 2018 called access track. An access track will only be maintained when it is impassable to a standard four-wheel drive. So the effect of the policy is to require that house to own a four-wheel drive to get to the house. Now, they can't do that. They have no power to tell you what car you will own and what you won't. But it didn't stop them from doing it. So I've put up on your screen now a list of the roads of four-wheel drive access tracks. Now, council never published this, didn't give it to us, even though we requested it for 2 years. When they finally gave it through to us, they said, oh, here's what it is for part or all of the roads. Now, that is not a complete list. And in fact, there are roads that should be on there that aren't. For example, Rawdon Island Road is part four-wheel drive access track. Bulli Road is all four-wheel drive access track. Lattimore Road West should be all four-wheel drive access track. They just don't tell you this. So the question is, council have published a number of publications over the years where they claim to have done a certain amount of grading per year. Now up on your screen now is a table which I produced, which summarises what year they told it and what they claimed. And if we take an example of 2012-13, you can see in red that the actual distance, so this is the distance that I inspected and measured, came in at a total of 392 kilometres for the year. That's all they graded. Yet in the annual report on page 6, they said they graded over 600 kilometres a year. Now that is a complete fabrication. It bears no relationship to the truth whatsoever. Perhaps they learnt the lesson. Oh, let's go to the next year, 2015-16. Now, when I look at their grading program, which gave me the distance of the road, it totaled 590 kilometres. When I inspected it and came up with a revised amount they actually grade, it was 505 kilometres. But they told an IPART focus group, which they then tendered as evidence to IPART in support of a special rate variation, that they were grading 795 kilometres a year. Again, a complete fabrication. There's no relationship with the truth. So what I want to look at now is council submitted to IPART a grading program. Now in that grading program, it listed every single road, the width of the road and the length, and was expressed as distance. Now, if you were reading that document, you would draw the readily available conclusion that the distance that they state is the distance being graded. Now, we will show that that is a complete and utter fabrication. The other thing we'll show, and this has to be a guiding principle, is that in the road register, your statutory document, it has to record the amount that you own. So as a fundamental principle, you would say that the grading program distance can't be more than the distance stated in the road register, which is the distance you own. The other thing is, in council's internal asset register, the distance that it says that it owns also can't be more than either the roads register or it can't be more than the actual distance being graded. And we will show that that's completely untrue. As the old saying, lies, damned lies, and the council claimed grading distance. So I'll put up on your screen now a document which is a table. Now this is compiled by me, and you'll see there that we detail each road name, the asset register distance they say they own, the grading program distance they say is graded, and then in the far right is the inspected distance. So this is the distance that I went and measured as to what was being graded or not. Let's just go to McGilvery Road. It's about halfway down. The asset register says they own 111 metres. Yet the grading program claims they grade 600 metres. The inspection I did shows that only 80 metres of that road is being graded. Perhaps there's no worse example. Let's look at Reedy Money, almost at the bottom. Now the asset register says it owns 336 metres. It shouldn't grade more than that. The grading program says that it's 2,300 metres. When I inspected the actual distance, it's about 310. How can you go from 300 metres you say that you own to the grading program says you grade 2,300 metres? A person in council has fabricated this document and put in amounts being graded that are completely wrong, bear no relationship to the truth whatsoever. So how did they get the grading distance so wrong? Well, I'll put up another table here. This is a table which is the road register distance, so what they say under the statutory requirements they own, compared to council's internal asset register. And if we just take the first one as an example, which is Riverbend Road, the road register says that council owns 36 metres and the next 870 metres is owned by Crown. Compare that to council's asset register where they say they actually own 927 metres. Well, you cannot have both being true. The preference is, as a statutory document, the roads register must outweigh council's internal asset register. How can they be different? Let's take Bitterground Creek Road. That is not listed at all on the road register. So patently, that road doesn't exist and council doesn't own it. But on council's asset register, it says it owns 430 metres of it. Well, it can't because it's not on the road register. And you'll see exactly the same thing for Clayworth Road. It's not listed on the road register, but it says that council owns 1,853 on their asset register. Fig Tree Valley Way. Now we know that this was never a gazetted road, and that is supported by the road register not containing a listing for it. But yet in council's asset register, it listed it as 1,140 metres owned by council. It's impossible. They have fabricated something to justify whatever which bears no relationship to the truth whatsoever. I just want to turn to the number of graders that we need. So we have 4 graders at the moment. We talked about in the Special Rate Variation podcast, we never needed the 4th grader. We're going to flesh that out a little bit. So council's website said in 2020 that the grading crews are usually able to grade about 6 kilometres of road every day. And to continue the quote, it says this means on average a grading crew can grade up to 30 kilometres of road a week. Well, let's assume there are 48 weeks in a year. So 48 times 30 gives 1,440 kilometres, which is the distance one grader can grade during a year. Now we know we only grade 500 to 600 kilometres in total during a year. Based on what council says on their website, one grader could do all of our roads twice in a year. But we have 4 graders, so let's multiply it by 4. That gives us 5,760 kilometres that our 4 graders should and could be grading in a year. Based on that, we don't need 4 graders. What you find with council on their website is they'll put up something which is usually a fabrication. It bears no relationship to the truth or to facts. How it came to be there, I don't know, but a person in council authorised this, and that person needs to be held accountable. So I did a lot of really detailed analysis on the grading programs. In fact, I had the documents which showed me which road was graded and when, so I knew the date. So I extrapolated all of that information and I came up with totals of kilometres graded and durations and so forth. What it showed was some pretty alarming things. Now, I've just put up a table in front of you here. It's compiled by me, and it lists by year the amount of road that was graded. Now, on the top column, we have the council stated distance. So this is from the grading program. And then we have an average. And you can see pretty quickly that back in 2001, one grader was doing about 249 kilometres a year. And what's pretty apparent, if you go through to when we had 4 graders, is the efficiency has halved. So now each grader is doing about 114 kilometres a year. But it gets worse than that because we've got my inspection, which recorded actual distance. And they're in the 2 orange columns. And you can see that council stated distance should be discounted by about 14 or 15% from what it is in actual. And your averages per grader are coming down from 214 for 2 graders, now down to about 112. But it then gets worse than that, because you would think that if you're on the grading program, you get graded every single year. Well, that's not true. So the bottom blue line shows the roads not graded in the year that were due to be graded. So if we take 2012-13 as an example, 143 kilometres of kilometres were not graded in that year, but supposed to be. It gets worse, because then the bottom row in green shows that a number of roads were done twice in the year, but should have only been done once. And we can see that in 2012-13, 64 kilometres of roads were done twice and should have only been done once. Now, if you're a competent manager, how are you organising your grading program? You're not doing 142 kilometres of roads, but you're going to redo the roads for 64 kilometres twice in the year. It really is just absurd. I'm going to put another table up. Now, this is a detailed view of 2016-17, and we can see the performance of each of the 4 graders. Now, what stands out is grader 4. It's in a black line. And what you can see is the total kilometres, SJG actual, so this is what I measured that they did in the year, was 57 kilometres of road. That's all they did in 52 weeks, which is about a kilometre a week. Remember that when we talked about what was in council's website of 6 kilometres a day, 30 kilometres a week. It really is a complete fabrication. The other thing I looked at was whether the graders were employed efficiently. So were they fully utilised, which will say, did we need them or not need them? So I put up a table in front of you now, and we call this excess working days. Now, this came about because we looked at one road, Musio Road, 500 metres long dirt road, and yet the grader was there for 86 working days. So that's before they started their next road. Now, I thought this may have been an isolated example, but it wasn't. Stevens Street, 300 metres long, also 86 working days. Bob's Creek Road, 2.48 kilometres long, 34 working days. So what we have here is a list of the excess days, i.e. the days that they were standing idle per year. And you can see it ranges from 223 to 475 excess days a year. Now, there are only 245 working days in a year. So patently, we don't need a 4th grader. So just to wrap off part 1, I want to come back to, did council provide you or IPART false and misleading information? And I think you'd share the view, there is no question that they did. They presented them a grading program with distances stated which bear no relationship to the truth whatsoever. You'd also say that they didn't tell IPART they fully funded a third grader between 2007 and 2009. And when they put their 2010 special rate variation application in, they didn't tell them that. So that's a little bit misleading and a bit deceptive. The other thing that's probably more important is they said to IPART both in 2012 and 2017 that if you give us this special rate variation, we will not decrease service levels. Well, that is a complete fabrication. And you can see from gravel resheeting through to four-wheel drive access tracks and roads being cut off that the service level has fundamentally decreased. So the question from this first part is, Port Macquarie Hastings Council, are they incompetent, are they corrupt, or do they just don't care?